The thunder of hooves against desert rock echoed through the canyon as Bridger Calloway urged his stallion forward, dust clouds marking their solitary path like ghosts of better days. For 7 years, this had been his ritual dawn rides through the endless expanse of his Nevada ranch, where the only sounds were wind and the rhythmic breathing of his horse, Maverick. The billionaire's empire sprawled across 3 states, but here in the saddle, he was just another man running from memories that refused to fade. Bridger's weathered hands gripped the reins tighter as they crested a familiar ridge. Below stretched thousands of acres of his land, dotted with oil derricks and mining operations that had made him one of the wealthiest men in America. Yet wealth couldn't fill the hollow ache that had consumed him since Celestine's death. His wife had been everything: his anchor, his joy, his reason for building something beyond himself. When cancer took her, it took his capacity for connection. With it, the sun climbed higher, painting the landscape in shades of amber and rust. Maverick snorted, sensing his rider's familiar melancholy. The horse had been Celestine's choice, a wild Mustang she'd insisted they rescue from government roundup. "He needs us," she'd said, her eyes bright with the compassion that had first captured Bridger's heart. Now Maverick was all he had left of those days, when laughter echoed through their sprawling ranch house. As they descended toward the valley, Bridger noticed something unusual: smoke rising from an abandoned cabin near the old creek bed. He'd bought that property years ago, along with dozens of others, but it had sat empty since the previous owner moved to the city. Curiosity overrode his desire for solitude, and he guided Maverick toward the thin column of smoke. The cabin appeared inhabited, with freshly chopped wood stacked beside the door and wildflowers planted in rusty coffee cans. Along the porch, a battered pickup truck sat in the shade, its license plates too faded to read. Bridger dismounted, his boots crunching on gravel as he approached. The door opened before he could knock. A woman emerged, perhaps 35, with auburn hair streaked with premature silver and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt, her hands dirty from garden work. Behind her lingered a girl of maybe 8 or 9, with the same striking eyes and hair that caught sunlight like spun copper. "You must be Mr. Calloway," the woman said, her voice carrying a musical quality despite obvious wariness. "I'm Delilah Rossiter. This is my daughter, Indigo. We've been staying here temporarily. I hope that's all right. I left word with your property manager, but haven't heard back." Bridger studied them, noting the girl's worn but clean clothes, the mother's defensive posture. Squatters, probably, down on their luck. He should call his security team, have them removed. Instead, he found himself nodding slowly. "The cabin's been empty for years," he said. "No harm in someone making use of it." Indigo stepped forward, unafraid despite her mother's protective stance. She looked up at Maverick with undisguised wonder. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "Can I pet him?" Something in the child's reverent tone stirred memories Bridger had buried deep. Celestine had spoken of horses the same way, with that breathless appreciation for their grace and power. Against his better judgment, he found himself nodding. "His name's Maverick," Bridger said, watching as Indigo approached the stallion with natural confidence. "Let him smell your hand first." The girl followed his instruction perfectly, standing still as Maverick lowered his great head to investigate. When the horse's velvet muzzle brushed her palm, Indigo's face lit up with pure joy. The expression was so achingly familiar that Bridger had to look away. "We don't have much," Delilah said quietly, "but I can pay rent. I've been working at the diner in Copper Falls, and Indigo helps with odd jobs around town. People have been kind to us." Bridger studied the woman more closely. There were shadows under her eyes, the telltale signs of someone carrying more than their share of burdens. Yet she held herself with dignity, meeting his gaze without flinching. Pride. He recognized he'd worn the same armor in his early days, before oil money had insulated him from life's sharper edges. "Your daughter knows horses," he observed, watching Indigo stroke Maverick's neck with gentle confidence. "Her father taught her," Delilah replied, then quickly changed the subject. "The cabin just needs a few repairs. I've been fixing what I can: new shingles, patch the roof leak. I know carpentry, Before Bridger could respond, Indigo spoke up. "Mama, can we show him the garden?" She looked at Bridger with earnest eyes. "We planted vegetables and flowers. The flowers aren't for eating, but they make everything prettier." Delilah's cheeks flushed. "Mr. Calloway probably has more important things to do than look at our garden, sweetheart." The word sweetheart hit Bridger like a physical blow. That had been Celestine's favorite endearment. For the children they'd never been able to have. He cleared his throat roughly. "I'd like to see it," he heard himself say. The garden was impressive for its makeshift nature, neat rows of tomatoes, beans, and squash bordered by cheerful marigolds and sunflowers. Someone had fashioned a scarecrow from old clothes and straw, its lopsided grin somehow endearing. Indigo chattered about each plant as if they were personal friends, her enthusiasm infectious despite Bridger's determination to remain detached. "The tomatoes are getting big," she announced proudly. "Mama says we'll have enough to make sauce for winter. And look," she pointed to a corner where morning glories climbed a makeshift trellis. "These will have blue flowers that open in the morning and close at night. It's like they're sleeping." Bridger found himself genuinely impressed. This wasn't the work of drifters or con artists. These were people trying to build something, to create stability from uncertainty. The realization should have made it easier to ask them to leave. Instead, it complicated everything. "You've done good work here," he said finally. Delilah's shoulders relaxed slightly. "We don't want charity, Mr. Calloway. Just a chance to earn our keep and maybe save enough to find a permanent place. Where are you?" "From originally Oklahoma. Lost our farm in the drought 3 years ago." Her voice carried old pain carefully controlled. "Been moving around since then, looking for somewhere to settle." Indigo had wandered back to Maverick, who stood patiently as she braided wildflowers into his mane. The sight stirred something in Bridger's chest, a warmth he'd thought permanently extinguished. Over the following weeks, Bridger found his morning rides increasingly drawn toward the cabin. He told himself it was simple property management, ensuring his temporary tenants weren't causing damage or creating liability issues. But the truth was more complex. Watching Indigo tend her garden or seeing Delilah repair the cabin's weathered siding filled a void he hadn't realized still existed. The girl had an uncanny way with horses. Maverick, who'd been skittish around strangers since Celestine's death, seemed to anticipate Indigo's presence. He would crane his neck toward the cabin as they approached, whickering softly when he spotted her small figure. More than once, Bridger caught himself staying longer than necessary, mesmerized by the child's natural grace as she moved around the great stallion. "She's got the gift," old Pete Henley observed one morning. Pete had managed Bridger's stables for 15 years, and his assessment of horsemanship was rarely wrong. "Reminds me of your missus, the way she connects with them." Bridger didn't respond, but Pete's words echoed through his mind as he watched Indigo brush Maverick's coat. With reverent care, Celestine had possessed that same intuitive understanding of horses, that ability to communicate without words. It was one of the things that had drawn him to her, the way she could gentle the wildest mustang. With nothing but patience and love, Delilah proved equally fascinating in her own way. She worked with quiet determination, transforming the neglected cabin into something approaching a home. New curtains appeared in the windows, fashioned from fabric she'd found at the church thrift store. The sagging porch steps were reinforced with salvaged lumber. A garden trellis emerged from discarded fence posts and chicken wire, soon heavy with climbing beans and flowering vines. "Mama's really good at fixing things," Indigo announced one afternoon as Bridger dismounted near their garden. "She fixed our truck 3 times, and she built our whole chicken coop back home before the drought came." "Indigo," Delilah chided, gently emerging from behind the cabin with an armload of laundry. "Mr. Calloway doesn't need to hear our whole life story." But Bridger found himself curious about their story. Over cautious conversations, he learned that Delilah had been widowed 2 years ago, when her husband died in a farming accident. The drought had made their debts impossible to manage, forcing the sale of their generational farm. Since then, they'd been nomads, moving from town to town as Delilah found work and Indigo attended whatever school would have her. "It's hard on her," Delilah confided one evening as they watched Indigo play with a litter of barn kittens. She'd discovered she needs stability, friends her own age, but everywhere we go, it's the same story: no permanent work, no way to put down roots. Bridger studied the child, noting the way she spoke to the kittens with gentle authority, the careful way she handled their tiny bodies. There was an old soul quality to Indigo that reminded him painfully of Celestini. His wife had possessed that same natural wisdom, that ability to nurture, and heal simply by being present. The school in Copper Falls is decent, he found himself saying. They might have space for her. Delilah's eyes widened with surprise and something that looked like hope. We couldn't afford tuition, and I don't know how long we'll be staying. It's public school. No tuition, and if you're planning to stay through winter, she'll need proper schooling. The conversation felt surreal. He was discussing educational plans for a child he'd known mere weeks, making assumptions about arrangements that had no formal structure. Yet something about Indigo's presence had awakened protective instincts. He'd thought permanently buried with Celestini. That night, alone in his vast ranch house, Bridger stood before the window that overlooked the valley where the cabin's lights twinkled like fallen stars. For the first time in 7 years, the silence didn't feel quite so oppressive. The first frost came early that year, painting the valley in crystalline beauty, and bringing with it an unexpected crisis. Bridger arrived at the cabin one morning to find Delilah struggling with frozen pipes and a furnace that had given up completely. Indigo huddled near a makeshift fire in the fireplace, wrapped in every blanket they owned. Just a temporary setback, Delilah said through chattering teeth, her pride warring with obvious desperation. I'll figure something out. Bridger made a decision that surprised even him. Pack up what you need. You're staying at the main house until this is fixed. We couldn't possibly. It's not charity. He said firmly. It's common sense. Nobody freezes on my property. The ranch house felt different with unexpected guests. Indigo's awestruck exploration of rooms that had stood empty for years brought life to spaces that had become mausoleums to his grief. She marveled at the library with its floor-to-ceiling shelves, spent hours in Celestine's old studio where art supplies sat untouched beneath dust covers. Did someone paint these? She asked, studying the canvases that lined the studio walls. Celestine's horses, captured in oils with loving detail. My wife, Bridger said quietly. She loved to paint. Indigo studied the paintings with serious concentration. They look happy, she decided. The horses, I mean, like they knew she loved them. The simple observation cut deeper than any elaborate condolence. This child saw what others had missed, that Celestine's art had been about connection, about celebrating the bonds between human and animal, between heart and hope. Delilah proved to be a gracious houseguest, careful not to intrude while somehow making the vast spaces feel warmer. She cooked simple but delicious meals, bringing the scent of fresh bread and herbs to a kitchen that had known only silence for too long. She mended things, without being asked: a loose button on his shirt, a torn cushion cover, small repairs that spoke of someone accustomed to caring for others. One evening, as snow began to fall in earnest, Bridger found himself sharing stories of the ranch's history, of the early days when he and Celestini had dreamed of filling the house with children and laughter. Indigo listened with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions that showed she understood the weight of dreams deferred. Mama says dreams don't die, she said solemnly. They just change shape sometimes. Delilah shot her daughter a warning look, but Indigo continued with the fearless honesty of childhood. Like our farm dream. It didn't die, it just turned into a different kind of adventure. That night, Bridger lay awake thinking about dreams and their various forms. For 7 years, he'd believed his capacity for hope had died with Celestini. Yet here were these two strangers, temporary guests in his temporary kindness, somehow making permanent changes to his carefully guarded heart. The repairs to the cabin would take several weeks, the contractor informed him. Winter weather made everything more complicated. Bridger found himself oddly relieved by the delay. Are you sure we're not imposing? Delilah asked for the 100th time. The house is too big for one person, he replied, and realized it was the first time he'd admitted that fundamental truth aloud. As the days shortened and snow blanketed the valley, the three of them fell into unexpected rhythms. Morning rides, where Indigo perched in front of Bridger on Maverick's back, her delighted laughter echoing off canyon walls. Evening conversations by the fireplace where Delilah's gentle wisdom helped him see familiar sorrows from new angles. Simple moments of connection that felt both foreign and necessary. After years of deliberate isolation, the letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late January, delivered by a nervous courier who seemed surprised to find people actually living. At the remote ranch, Delilah's face went pale as she read the return address, and her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Bridger noticed her distress immediately. "Bad news. I have to go to Denver," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "There's a legal matter I've been avoiding. I can probably handle it in a day or two." "What kind of legal matter?" Delilah hesitated, then seemed to steel herself. "Indigo's father, before he died. He made some arrangements. His family is contesting certain provisions of his will. They've been trying to contact me for months," something in her tone suggested. There was more to the story, but Bridger didn't press. Privacy was something he understood and respected. "Take the truck. Indigo can stay here. I'll keep an eye on her. I couldn't ask you to babysit. You're not asking. I'm offering." After Delilah left, Indigo seemed subdued, spending long hours in the stable with Maverick or curled up in the library with books about horses. On the second evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, she finally spoke about what was troubling her. "Mama's scared," she said simply. "She thinks I don't know, but I can tell. She's been scared ever since Daddy died." Bridger sat down, his coffee cup, giving her his full attention. "Scared of what?" "Of Daddy's family. They never liked Mama because she wasn't fancy enough. They didn't want Daddy to marry her." Indigo's voice grew smaller. "They said mean things at the funeral about how Mama was just after Daddy's money, even though we never had any money." A cold understanding began to form in Bridger's mind. "What was your father's name?" "Indigo. Cordell. Rossiter. But everyone called him Dell. He was really good with horses, just like Mama said. He taught me everything about riding and taking care of them." She looked up at Bridger with eyes that held too much knowledge for her age. "The lawyers say his family wants me to live with them instead of Mama, but I don't want to. They don't love me like Mama does." Bridger felt something cold settle in his chest. The Rossiter name was familiar, a wealthy ranching family from Colorado with old money and older prejudices. If Delilah was fighting them for custody of her own daughter, she was facing resources that could crush her legal battle before it truly began. "Your mother will figure it out," he said, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. But when Delilah called that night, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, Bridger's fears were confirmed. "They have 3 lawyers," she whispered into the phone. 3, and they're claiming I'm an unfit mother because we've been transient, because I can't provide stability. They say Indigo needs proper education and social advantages that only they can give her." "What do you need?" Bridger asked without hesitation. "I need a miracle," Delilah said, and he could hear tears in her voice. "I need to prove that I can give Indigo a stable home, that we're not just drifters." "But how can I do that when we've been living in your cabin for months, when I don't even have a permanent address?" Bridger stared out the window at the snow-covered valley, his mind racing. An idea was forming, dangerous in its implications, potentially life-changing in its scope. But as he looked at Indigo curled up with one of Celestine's art books, her small face peaceful in sleep, he realized the decision had already been made. "Come home," he said quietly. "We'll figure this out together." Delilah returned from Denver defeated, but not broken. Her shoulders set with the same determined pride that had first impressed Bridger. The legal battle ahead would be expensive and uncertain, but she was prepared to fight with everything she had. What she wasn't prepared for was Bridger's proposal. "Marry me," he said simply as they stood in his study. Legal documents spread across the desk like battle plans. Delilah stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "What? It's a practical solution. Marriage would give you legal standing, financial resources, a stable address. The Rossiters couldn't claim you're an unfit mother if you're married to someone with my resources and reputation. That's insane, Delilah breathed. You barely know us. This is your grief talking. Your guilt over being alone. This isn't about grief, Bridger interrupted, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. Or maybe it is, but not the way you think. You and Indigo have brought something back to this place, to me, that I thought was gone forever. Hope, maybe, purpose. The possibility that life can be about more than just surviving from one day to the next. Delilah shook her head. I won't marry you for money or legal protection. That's not who I am. I'm not asking you to marry me for those reasons. I'm asking because these past months have been the first time since Celestini died that I've felt truly alive. Because watching Indigo with the horses reminds me why I fell in love with this land in the first place. Because when I imagine this house empty again, I can't breathe. The raw honesty in his voice seemed to shake her. She sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. This is crazy. We're practically strangers, are we? Bridger moved to the window, looking out at the valley where Indigo was playing with the barn kittens. I know you take your coffee with just a touch of cream. I know you hum while you cook, usually old country songs your mother taught you. I know you check on Indigo 3 times every night, and that you cry sometimes when you think no one can hear you. That's not the same as love, Delilah said quietly. No, Bridger agreed. But it's the beginning of understanding. And understanding can grow into something deeper, given time. The conversation was interrupted by Indigo bursting through the door, her cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. Bridger, come see what Maverick did. He opened his stall door all by himself, and now he's playing with the other horses. As they walked to the stable together, Indigo slipped her small hand into Bridger's larger one with unconscious trust. The gesture sent a surge of protective tenderness through him that was almost overwhelming. In its intensity. At the stable, they found Maverick indeed free from his stall, nuzzling the other horses with apparent contentment. It was the first time since Celestine's death that the stallion had shown interest in socializing with the herd. He was lonely, Indigo observed with matter-of-fact wisdom, just like people get lonely. But now he has friends again. That evening, as Indigo worked on homework at the kitchen table and Delilah prepared dinner, Bridger found himself studying the scene with new eyes. This was what Celestini had dreamed of, not necessarily biological children, but family in all its forms, love that chose itself rather than being bound by blood alone. I have one condition, Delilah said suddenly, not looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. Bridger's heart jumped. What if we do this? And I'm not saying yes yet, but if we do, it has to be real, not just a legal arrangement. I won't have Indigo growing up thinking love is something you fake for practical reasons. It would be real, Bridger said quietly. More real than anything I've felt in 7 years. Delilah finally looked at him, her storm gray eyes searching his face for truth. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, the wedding took place 3 weeks later in the ranch's small chapel, with only Indigo, Pete, and the local minister as witnesses. Delilah wore a simple blue dress she'd bought in town, and Bridger discovered that his hands shook as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It wasn't the same as what he'd shared with Celestini. It was something entirely new, built on different foundations, but no less meaningful for its unique origins. The Rossiters' legal challenge crumbled quickly once they learned of the marriage. Faced with the prospect of battling Bridger Calloway's resources and reputation, they withdrew their custody claim with barely concealed fury. Indigo's relief was palpable, but she surprised everyone by asking if she could visit her paternal grandparents sometime. They're still my family too, she explained with characteristic wisdom. Maybe if they get to know me better, they'll understand that Mama and I belong together. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed to permeate every corner of the ranch. The cabin by the creek was converted into Pete's new residence, while Delilah and Indigo settled permanently into the main house. Celestine's studio became Indigo's art room, where she painted horses with the same loving attention her stepfather's first wife had shown. On a warm morning in April, as Bridger saddled Maverick for their daily ride, Indigo approached with a small wrapped package. What's this? He asked, accepting the gift with curiosity. It's for you. From Mama and me, but mostly from Mama. Inside the wrapping was a photograph in a handmade frame. Bridger and Indigo on horseback, taken by Delilah during one of their morning rides. But it was the inscription on the frame that stopped his breath. For the man who taught us that home isn't a place, it's where love chooses to stay. As he stared at the words, Indigo climbed onto a fence rail to be closer to his eye level. Her small face was serious, her gray eyes reflecting depths of understanding that continued to amaze him. "Mama told me about your first wife," she said quietly, "about how much you loved her. She said love doesn't get smaller when you share it, it gets bigger. Like how loving me didn't make Mama love Daddy less." Bridger felt tears prick his eyes. "Your mama is very wise." "She is," Indigo agreed solemnly. Then her expression brightened. "And guess what? Mama's going to have a baby. We're going to have a real family now, with a little brother or sister for me to teach about horses." The words hit Bridger like a physical blow, not of pain, but of overwhelming joy. He looked toward the house where Delilah stood on the porch, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, her smile radiant with happiness and hope. As Indigo chattered excitedly about baby names and nursery colors, Bridger felt the last walls around his heart crumble completely. This wasn't the life he'd planned with Celestini, but it was beautiful in its own unique way. Different dreams, as Indigo had said, but dreams nonetheless. That evening, as the family sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Indigo made an announcement that surprised them all. "I want to change my name," she said seriously. "Not my first name, I like Indigo, but I want to be Indigo Calloway now, if that's okay with everyone." Delilah's eyes filled with tears. "Sweetheart, are you sure? Rossiter was your daddy's name. Daddy will always be my daddy," Indigo said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "But Bridger is my family now too, and families should have the same name." Later, after Indigo had gone to bed, Bridger and Delilah sat together on the porch swing, her head resting on his shoulder as stars emerged in the darkening sky. "Do you think Celestini would approve?" Delilah asked softly. Bridger considered the question seriously. "I think she'd be happy that the house is full of laughter again, that Maverick has someone to braid flowers in his mane, that you've brought art back to her studio and love back to these rooms." "I'm not trying to replace her. You couldn't," Bridger said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I wouldn't want you to. You're something entirely your own, you and Indigo both. You've shown me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding room for new love alongside old memories." As if summoned by their conversation, Maverick appeared at the edge of the porch light. Whickering softly, Bridger rose to stroke the stallion's neck, marveling at how the once lonely horse now moved freely between pasture and stable, bonded to the herd but secure in his special relationship with the family. "He's not lonely anymore," Delilah observed, echoing her daughter's earlier insight. "None of us are," Bridger replied, pulling his wife close as their future grew bright beneath the vast Nevada sky. For the first time in years, the silence held. No sorrow, only peace, and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come.